There is a name missing from your Bible. Not missing the way a page gets torn out. Not missing because someone decided you were not allowed to know. Missing the way a word gets quietly retired from a language. Still alive in older books. Still spoken in places that never forgot. But gone from the version most people in the Western world grew up holding in their hands. You can read the whole Bible cover to cover and never find it. You can sit through years of Sunday sermons and never hear it spoken from a pulpit. You can grow up inside a faith tradition that traces itself back 2,000 years and walk away with no idea this name ever existed. And yet it did. It does. Removed here does not mean erased from all of Christianity. It means something quieter than that, more human than that. The name Rome set aside, while other traditions kept it alive. That name is Uriel. Tonight, before sleep comes, we find out why. Rome. The year was 745. Close your eyes for a moment and try to hold that city in your mind. Not the Rome of tourists and afternoon photographs. The Rome of 745 was a city that had already survived more than most cities are ever asked to survive. Empires had risen inside its walls and collapsed inside them. The language had changed. The gods had changed. The very identity of the place had shifted so many times, across so many centuries, that the Rome of that year would have been almost unrecognizable to the Rome of 1,000 years before. The people who walked its streets in 745 prayed to a god their distant ancestors would not have recognized. Inside, churches built on ground their great-grandmothers had known by different names and different purposes. The old world had been swallowed whole by something new, and that something new had been doing the work of a living tradition for 7 centuries. It had survived persecution and schism and the collapse of the empire that had once tried to destroy it. It had outlasted everything thrown at it. And in doing so, it had learned what all surviving institutions eventually learn. That survival requires decisions. That not every idea that enters a tradition can stay inside it forever. That at some point, someone has to sit in a room and say, this stays, and this does not. Pope Zachary understood that. He was not a dramatic figure by the broad sweep of papal history. He did not wage wars or reshape theological landscapes with a single document. What he did, in the quiet and procedural way that most institutional history actually gets made, was manage. He looked at the vast and complicated religious life of the people under his care and made the kinds of decisions that keeping a tradition coherent across centuries requires. And in 745, one of the things he decided to bring order to was angels. To understand why that was necessary, you have to understand what popular religious life in 8th century Europe actually looked like from the inside. It did not look like the clean and organized faith that official church documents of the period describe. It was stranger than that, and more alive. Angels were not abstract theological concepts to ordinary people of that era. They were not distant symbols in a doctrinal framework. They were real, present, active beings with names and personalities and specific areas of authority over specific corners of human experience. People prayed to them by name. Communities built devotional practices around them. Manuscripts circulated through parishes and monasteries containing long lists of angel names, each name attached to a specific function, a specific kind of power, a specific way of being called upon in moments of need. Some of those names had roots in ancient Jewish texts that predated Christianity by centuries. Some came from traditions that had developed in the fertile and largely ungoverned territory between official doctrine and popular practice. The place where ordinary people actually lived their spiritual lives. Some were attached to beings whose nature and origins no church authority could confidently account for. There was also, according to church records of the period, the specific case of a wandering holy man named Adalbert, who had been drawing large followings in the Frankish territories, invoking angel names in ways the church considered theologically unsafe. and embodying the kind of charismatic popular religion that institutional authority found genuinely threatening to the coherence of the faith. Adalbert was not a fringe figure. People believed in him, and he was only the most visible manifestation of a much broader pattern of angel veneration that had grown well beyond what official theology could easily supervise. The council looked at this landscape and reached for the same tool that institutions have always reached for when faced with a complex and unwieldy problem. They simplified. They drew a line. They asked a single clarifying question. The kind that sounds obvious and turns out to carry consequences that stretch across centuries. Does this name appear in Scripture? Not in every ancient text that called itself Scripture. In the specific canon of texts that the Roman Church recognized as authoritative, the texts that had been debated and argued over, and finally settled into something approaching consensus through centuries of theological struggle, by that standard, 3 names survived without difficulty. Michael appeared in the book of Daniel, in the letter of Jude, in the book of Revelation. His presence in the authorized texts was undeniable. Gabriel appeared in Daniel and in the Gospel of Luke, delivering the announcement of the birth of Jesus. His canonical standing was equally clear. Raphael appeared in the book of Tobit, named explicitly, given dialogue, assigned a specific mission. 3 names, 3 clear presences in the texts the council recognized. 3 beings whose veneration could be pointed to and defended within the established boundaries of authorized scripture. Uriel was not among them, not because anyone argued he was a false or dangerous being, not because a secret deliberation concluded his name was too powerful to remain in the public imagination, but because in the canon the Roman Church had established. His name did not appear with the clarity and canonical weight of the other 3. He existed in texts the tradition had set aside. He lived in manuscripts that circulated outside official channels. He was present in the popular religious imagination in ways that official doctrine could not easily trace back to an authorized source. And so the council made its decision. Not dramatically, not with the kind of moment that gets commemorated and retold across centuries. Just a decision, made by people doing the careful and unglamorous work that keeping a tradition coherent requires. The list of officially sanctioned angel names was shortened to 3. Everything beyond those 3 was moved to a category that had no place in authorized devotional practice. Let the weight of that settle for a moment before we move forward. What happened in Rome in 745 was not a suppression. It was a narrowing, a decision made for reasons that had a genuine and coherent logic within the framework of that tradition at that moment. The Roman Church was not wrong to want clear criteria for what could be officially venerated. The desire to protect popular religious practice from theological uncertainty is not an impulse that belongs only to institutions. It is an impulse that any tradition that cares about its people eventually has to act on. But every narrowing has consequences that extend beyond the immediate problem it was designed to solve. The immediate consequence was a more manageable landscape of popular angel veneration. The longer consequence, the one that accumulated slowly across generations and centuries, was the gradual disappearance of an entire dimension of the religious imagination from the world that tradition shaped. And it is important to say clearly what that narrowing was and what it was not. It was a decision made by one tradition within Christianity, the Roman and Latin Catholic practice, not a decree that reached Ethiopia, where an entirely different canon of scripture had been preserved, a canon that included texts the Roman Church had set aside, not a decision that governed the monasteries of the Christian East, where Uriel continued to appear in icons and prayers and liturgical art for centuries after Rome had let his name fade from official use. Not a ruling that touched the communities of Jewish mystical tradition, which maintained their own understanding of the angelic world, independent of any Christian canonical decision. The story of Uriel's disappearance from the Western imagination is the story of one tradition drawing one set of lines, which means it is also the story of everything that was left on the other side of those lines. And that is exactly where tonight's journey takes us. The streets of Rome are very quiet at this hour. Whatever urgency belongs to the council room and the decisions of 745 is very far away from where you are right now. You are in a different kind of room, a quieter one, and the name that was set down in that distant year is here with you in this room, waiting to be followed back to where it came from. Let your body settle a little more into the surface beneath you. Let the breath find a slower rhythm without any assistance from you. We are going deeper into the story now. There is a picture that most people raised in Western Christian traditions carry somewhere in the back of their minds. 3 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, a fixed number, a settled list, the kind of fact that feels so stable, it seems like it must have always been that way. The kind of certainty that gets absorbed without being consciously learned, because it was simply part of the landscape of everything that was handed down. That picture is not wrong exactly, but it is incomplete in a way that matters. The number of archangels has never been fixed, not in the oldest texts, not in the traditions that predated Christianity, not even across the various branches of Christianity that grew up in different places with different textual inheritances. What we have instead of a single settled answer is something more interesting and more human. A long history of different communities, in different centuries and different places, looking at the same fundamental question and arriving at answers that differed in ways that reflected their own particular theological priorities and textual inheritances. One of the earliest and most influential surviving answers is 7. In the text known as First Enoch, one of the most significant pieces of ancient Jewish religious writing that exists outside the standard Western biblical canon, there is a passage in the 20th chapter that does something no passage in the Hebrew Bible quite does in the same way. It gives a specific named list of the angels who stand before God and are assigned authority over specific domains of the created order, in the commonly cited translation by Robert Henry Charles, completed in 1917. That list in chapter 20 expands to 7 names: Uriel, Raphael, Raguel, Michael, Sarakiel, Gabriel, and Ramiel. 7 beings, each assigned a function, each given a name and a territory of responsibility within the structure of the cosmos. Scholars note that angelic lists can vary across different manuscripts and textual traditions, and the precise names in some versions differ slightly. But what remains consistent across most versions of this passage is that the number is substantially larger than 3. And Uriel appears at the very top of it. 7 was a number with deep symbolic weight in the ancient Jewish imagination. 7 days of creation, 7 seals, 7 lamps of the menorah. 7 was the number of completeness in time, the number of the full cycle that begins and ends and begins again. A cosmos watched over by 7 archangels was a cosmos in which every aspect of created existence across the full arc of time had a guardian, a being of light whose specific attention was turned toward it. Let that image rest for a moment. 7 guardians, 7 territories, the full arc of time covered. 4 carried a different symbolic weight entirely. 4 was the number of space, the 4 directions, the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 winds. In the traditions that imagined 4 archangels standing watch, the picture was of beings stationed at the cardinal points of the created world, each one oriented toward a different horizon, together forming a complete and unbroken enclosure of presence around the whole of created space. Later, Jewish mystical and liturgical traditions, drawing on older symbolic patterns about the 4 directions, developed this image into a specific devotional practice. 4 archangels placed around the one at rest, Michael to the right, Gabriel to the left, Raphael ahead, Uriel behind, a protection that covered every direction simultaneously, leaving no corner of the world unguarded. And then there is 3, the number the Roman Church settled on, It is worth being fair to that choice, because it was not arbitrary or careless. The three names that survived the Council of 745 are the three names with the clearest and most unambiguous presence in the texts the Roman canon recognized. Their canonical standing was solid and defensible in a way that no other angel name could match by the criteria the tradition had established. In many symbolic systems, and especially in Christian theology, three came to carry a powerful association with divine completeness. The Trinity, 3 days in the tomb. The number 3 had a resonance within Christian theology that made it feel like a natural number for the beings who stood closest to the divine presence. That choice had its own coherence, its own integrity. But here is what deserves to be said, slowly and clearly. The choice of 3 was not the recovery of an original pure number that had always been correct. It was a simplification, a narrowing of a tradition that had always been more varied and more complex than the simplified version. Different communities had been living with different answers to the question of how many archangels there were, and none of those answers had ever been universal. 3 covered the divine relationship. 4 covered the created world in space. Every direction a human being could face or turn away from. 7 covered the full arc of time, when the list went from 7 to 3. And when 4 became a number, the Western tradition stopped carrying forward. Specific territories of the religious imagination went with them. Not immediately, not all at once, but slowly, across generations. The cosmic architecture that 7 pointed toward, and the spatial completeness that 4 embodied, became things the Western Christian imagination no longer had official language for. Uriel lived at the intersection of all of it. He was the first name on the list of 7. He was the one stationed at the west in the tradition of 4. He was the one whose domain covered the threshold between the ordered world and what lay beyond it. When the number went to 3, that position went with him. The gap between 3 and 7, between 3 and 4, is not a small gap. It is the gap between a tradition that covered everything and a tradition that covered what it could most clearly authorize. Both have their own integrity. Both have their own logic. But what the gap contains is worth knowing. The breath is slower now. Perhaps the edges of the day a little softer. We are going further in. Names in the ancient world were not decorative. This is one of those things that sounds simple and turns out to be surprisingly difficult to fully absorb. Because the world we live in has largely lost the assumption that names carry essential meaning. Children get named after grandparents, after characters in books, after sounds that please their parents when spoken aloud. The name is a label, a way of distinguishing one person from another, a piece of identity that gets attached early and is mostly carried without examination. The ancient world worked from a different assumption, particularly in the Hebrew tradition that gave us the names of the archangels. In that tradition, names were understood to be revelatory. A name was not a label attached to a being for the convenience of other beings who needed to refer to it. A name was a disclosure. It told you something real and essential about what the named thing was, how it functioned, what its relationship to the rest of creation was. You can see this logic working everywhere in the biblical tradition. When Abram becomes Abraham, the name change is not administrative. It marks a fundamental shift in who he is and what his role in the unfolding story will be. When Jacob wrestles through the night and walks away with the name Israel, the new name encodes the entire meaning of the struggle. Names in this tradition are discovered, given, earned, and they carry within them a compressed account of the truth about the being that bears them. The archangel names follow this pattern with remarkable consistency. Michael, in Hebrew, is a question, something very close to who is like God. And the question is rhetorical. The answer is no one. Michael's name encodes his function in a single phrase. He is the one who stands where the claim to be equal to God is most directly confronted and most decisively refused. His name is not a description of what he does. It is a declaration of the cosmic order he exists to defend. Gabriel means something in the territory of God is my strength or strong man of God. Gabriel is the messenger, the one who carries the most consequential communications from the divine to the human. The strength in his name is not military strength. It is the strength required to carry truth across the enormous distance between heaven and earth without losing or distorting it. His name says something about the reliability of what he delivers. Raphael, whose name draws from the Hebrew root for healing combined with the divine name, means something like God heals or it is God who heals. Raphael's role in the book of Tobit is exactly that. He heals Tobit's blindness. He drives away the demon that has been killing the men who marry Sarah. His name is a direct description of his function. Simple and exact. And then there is Uriel. The name Uriel is usually understood as God is my light, or fire of God, or light of God, drawn from a Hebrew root connected to light and flame, combined with the ancient divine name El, like the other archangel names. It is a compressed theological statement, a declaration of relationship between the divine and the one who bears the name, but the specific quality being declared is worth sitting with carefully, because it is not quite what it might seem at first encounter. Light, in the ancient Jewish imagination, was not primarily a symbol of comfort. We have inherited a version of the light metaphor that emphasizes warmth and safety and gentle guidance through darkness. Those meanings are real and present in the tradition, but they are not the whole of what light meant to the people who gave Uriel his name. Light, in its older and more demanding sense, was the condition of exposure, the thing that made everything visible whether or not visibility was wanted. Light was what happened when the hidden became unhidden, when what had been existing in the comfortable ambiguity of darkness was suddenly and completely present. That kind of light was not gentle. It was clarifying, and clarification, in the ancient world, as in this one, is not always comfortable. There is also the flame dimension of the name. Fire in the ancient world was the transformer, the thing that changed whatever it touched into something other than what it had been, the thing that burned away what was perishable and left only what could survive the burning. Fire was the agent of both destruction and purification, and in religious contexts it was almost always present at moments of crossing, at thresholds, at the boundaries between one state of being and another. Put those two meanings together, the revealing light and the transforming fire, and the picture of Uriel that emerges is quite different from the soft ambient glow that his name might suggest at first glance. This is not the angel of the nightlight. This is the angel of the threshold, the one who stands at the boundary between what is hidden and what is revealed, between what has been and what is about to be changed into something different. His light does not make things cozier. It makes them visible. His fire does not warm. It transforms. In many of the texts and traditions where Uriel appears most clearly, this quality shows up with remarkable consistency. He stands at the gate where the fallen angels are kept, at the boundary between the ordered world and what lies beneath it. He takes Enoch to the edge of things, to the boundary between the human world and what exists beyond it, and illuminates what is there. He brings the warning that allows someone to survive the crossing from one world to the next. Compare this for a moment to the other archangels. Michael fights. Gabriel delivers messages. Raphael heals. These are functions that, while profound, have a certain directness. What Uriel does is different. Uriel illuminatis. Uriel stands at the boundary and makes visible what is on the other side of it. He is the one you encounter at the moment of crossing itself, not the one who fights your battles or carries your messages or mends your wounds, but the one whose light falls on the threshold and reveals it for what it is. His name tells you what he is. Light at the boundary, fire at the threshold, which means that this night, This particular quality of darkness and stillness, this moment where you are lying at the edge of the place where waking gives way to sleep, is exactly the kind of moment that his name was made for. You are at a threshold right now, the most ordinary and extraordinary threshold a human being ever crosses, and somewhere in the long memory of the tradition that knew his name, there is a being whose function is precisely to stand at this edge and illuminate what is here. You do not have to believe that to feel the truth it points toward. You only have to be willing to be here. At the edge, in the light, let the breath slow a little more. Let the body grow heavier against the surface beneath you. The name has been spoken. The threshold has been named. We go deeper now. There is a book that most people raised in Western Christian traditions have never read. Not because it is difficult to find. You can locate it in minutes. You can order a printed copy and have it in your hands within days. It has not been locked away. It has not required special permission or restricted access for a very long time. It is simply a book that the Western tradition, for reasons we have already begun to explore, quietly stopped carrying forward in the same way it carried other books. And because it stopped being carried forward, most people who grew up inside that tradition grew up not knowing it existed. The book is called First Enoch. It is one of the oldest surviving pieces of extended Jewish religious writing we have access to outside the standard Western biblical canon. Scholars generally believe that parts of it were composed as early as the 3rd century before the Common Era, which means some of its material predates the earliest books of the New Testament by several centuries. It circulated widely in the period when early Christianity was forming, and its influence on New Testament texts is visible to anyone who looks carefully. The letter of Jude, which is in the standard Christian Bible, contains a quotation drawn from First Enoch. The imagery of Revelation draws on traditions that First Enoch helped establish. Certain New Testament passages about angels and their relationship to human history echo the world that First Enoch built. And yet, in the Western biblical tradition, First Enoch was eventually set aside. In the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, it never was. There, it is canonical scripture, read and heard in liturgy, alongside Genesis and Psalms and the Gospels. A living presence in the faith of tens of millions of Christians who inherited a canon that was never narrowed in the same way the Western canon was. But in the tradition that shaped the modern West, First Enoch became apocryphal at best, a text that scholars studied and the theologically curious explored, but that no longer occupied a living place in the inherited faith. The reasons for that are complicated, involving centuries of debate about which texts belonged inside the authorized collection and which did not. But the result is clear. A significant part of the world that produced the Bible, the world in which the angels got their names and their functions and their places in the cosmic order, became invisible to most of the people who inherited those angels. Tonight, we step back into that world. The book opens with a figure named Enoch, who appears in the standard biblical tradition in 7 brief and mysterious verses in the book of Genesis. He is described as a man who walked with God. And then, instead of dying in the ordinary human way, he was simply taken. He was no longer there. Genesis does not explain where he went, or what he saw, or what the taking meant. It offers the absence without the explanation. First Enoch is, among other things, an attempt to fill that silence. It tells the story of what happened after Enoch was taken, what he saw, where he went, who guided him through the territories that no living human being was supposed to be able to access. And one of the primary guides in that journey, one of the beings who takes Enoch through the structure of the cosmos, is Uriel. Let that image settle for a moment before we move into what Uriel actually shows him. A human being, taken from ordinary life and brought to the edge of what ordinary life can hold, needs a guide, not a guide who makes the journey easier by hiding what is difficult, a guide who makes the journey possible by illuminating what is there. That is what Uriel does for Enoch. He does not protect him from seeing. He makes sure he can see. The first significant appearance of Uriel in the text places him at a location the book describes with imagery of extraordinary strangeness. Enoch is taken to a place at the edge of the world, a place where he sees great mountains of fire and a deep abyss, a location at the boundary of the known cosmos where beings who have fallen from their proper place are held in darkness, suspended between what they were and whatever judgment is coming. And Uriel stands there, not fighting, not delivering a message, not healing, standing at the threshold between one order of reality and another, present at the boundary where the consequences of certain choices exist in suspension, illuminating, for Enoch, what is here and what it means. The text in chapter 21 places Uriel as the one set over the world and over the deep prison where the fallen watchers are kept. That phrase carries something worth staying with. Set over both the ordered world and the chaos beneath it. His domain is not one or the other. It is the relationship between them. The threshold itself, the place where one becomes the other. Later, in the section, scholars call the astronomical book, which occupies chapters 72 through 82 of First Enoch, Uriel appears in a completely different register. Here, he is not the guardian of a cosmic boundary. He is a teacher. He is showing Enoch the structure of the heavens as that ancient cosmology understood them. The movements of the sun and moon, the gates through which the light enters and exits the world at different times of year, the laws that govern the alternation of seasons and the measurement of time within that ancient framework. The Uriel of the astronomical book knows things, specific, exact things within the vision of that ancient tradition. He knows how many days are in each month according to that reckoning. He knows the precise path of the sun through the sky in each season as First Enoch conceived it. He knows the relationship between the solar calendar and the lunar calendar and why they diverge and how that was accounted for within that cosmological framework. And he does not tell Enoch these things from a distance. He takes him to the places where these processes happen. He makes the invisible architecture of time visible, as that tradition understood it, by bringing a human consciousness to its actual location in the structure of the cosmos. This is a different kind of angel than the ones most Western Christians grew up imagining. This is a being who knows things, who considers it part of his function to pass that knowledge along, who does not stand apart from the human consciousness he is guiding, but rather takes it by the hand and leads it to the edge of what it can hold, and then one step further. The picture that emerges from First Enoch, if you read it with the patience it rewards, is of an archangel whose domain is the boundary between the known and the unknown, between the human world and what lies beyond it, between the ordered structure of creation and the territories at its edges. He is the one who stands at those boundaries and makes them permeable, who allows a human consciousness to pass through and return with something it could not have carried before the crossing. Something in that picture resonates even now. In a world that has largely lost the mythological framework within which Uriel's story was originally told, the experience of being taken to the edge of what you know and shown what is there, the experience of standing at the boundary between the familiar and the incomprehensible and finding that something is present to illuminate it, is not an experience that belongs only to ancient cosmological speculation. It is the experience you are having right now. In a quieter register, the edge between waking and sleep is a real boundary. What is on the other side of it is, in the most literal sense, unknown to the waking mind. Every night you cross that threshold. Every night you pass from one order of consciousness into another. First, Enoch knew about that kind of crossing. It knew about beings whose function was to stand at the boundary and illuminate it for the consciousness that needed to make the crossing but could not make it alone. The book knew his face. And in this quiet, in this particular darkness, you are beginning to know it too. Let the weight of the body settle further. Let the thoughts that are still moving find the stillness that is already here beneath them. We stay in the world of the ancient text a little longer. In the world of First Enoch, there is a moment that changes everything. Picture it. The ancient world, somewhere in the vast span of time before the flood. The earth is full, the sky is full, and something is coming that no human being can yet see. Approaching the way all catastrophes approach. Slowly at first, then all at once. Somewhere in the architecture of that ancient cosmology, at the boundary between the divine and the human, a decision is being made. And the question is, who will carry the knowledge of what is coming to the one human being who needs to receive it? That is the moment First Enoch is pointing at. Flood stories appear across many of the world's ancient traditions, and scholars have long reflected on this pattern. The recurrence of flood narratives across distant cultures may reflect many things. Local catastrophic floods preserved in regional memory. The simple fact that water has always been one of humanity's most powerful images of destruction and renewal. The deep human need to tell stories about survival at the edge of annihilation. Or the movement of narrative traditions across cultures through contact and exchange. Whatever the roots of this pattern, the specific version that concerns us tonight is the one that belongs to the world of First Enoch, and within that world, to the figure of Uriel, in the account most Western readers know, the one in Genesis. The warning comes directly from God. No intermediary is named. God speaks to Noah. God tells Noah what is coming. God instructs Noah in what to build and how to build it. The communication is direct, the mechanism unspecified. But in the world of First Enoch, the cosmic order works differently. The architecture of that text is one in which the archangels are not decorative. They are functional. They are the beings through whom knowledge moves across the enormous distance between the divine and the human. They watch what is happening in the world and bring that knowledge to the divine attention. They carry decisions back to the human world. They are, in the language of that tradition, the nervous system of a cosmos too large and too complex for any single channel of communication to serve. And in that architecture, according to the tradition preserved in First Enoch, it was Uriel who came to Noah, not Michael, whose domain was the defense of cosmic order against direct assault, not Gabriel, whose function was the delivery of divine announcements at specific moments in the unfolding of sacred history, not Raphael, whose work was healing and the restoration of what had been broken, but Uriel, whose name means light at the boundary, whose function was precisely to stand at the edge of what was coming and illuminate it for the human beings who needed to know. It is worth pausing here and saying this clearly. This is the tradition of First Enoch, not of Genesis. These are different texts from different moments in the development of ancient Jewish religious thought, and they do not always agree with each other. The Genesis account of Noah does not mention Uriel. It does not mention any archangel by name. First Enoch fills in a background that Genesis leaves empty. Imagining the cosmic architecture that underlies the events, the older text narrates at the human scale. Both texts belong to the same broad tradition. Neither cancels the other. They simply tell the same story from different distances. Whether you hold First Enoch as sacred scripture, as ancient literature, or simply as a remarkable piece of human imagination working on questions that have always needed to be worked on, the tradition preserves is worth sitting with, because it tells us something about how the ancient world understood Uriel that no other source quite captures in the same way. The detail that Uriel brings the warning, rather than one of the other archangels, is not arbitrary within the logic of that tradition. It fits the function his name describes. A catastrophe approaching is a threshold. The moment before everything changes is a boundary between one order of the world and another. The knowledge that allows someone to survive such a moment is precisely the kind of knowledge that belongs to a being whose domain is the revelation of what lies at the edge of the known, the illumination of what is coming before it arrives. The assignment makes sense. Uriel warns, because warning is what happens at thresholds, and thresholds are where Uriel stands. There is a particular quality to what he does in that moment that is worth feeling rather than just understanding. He does not arrive with reassurance. He does not promise that everything will be all right in the end, that the suffering will be limited, that the good will be preserved without cost. He arrives with the truth of what is coming, the full and unsparing truth, and he delivers it in time for someone to act on it. That is a different kind of gift than comfort. In some ways it is a harder one to receive. The truth of what is coming, before it arrives, requires the recipient to hold the knowledge of something difficult and use it rather than collapse under its weight. It requires a kind of steadiness that only comes from the act of receiving a hard truth and choosing to do something with it. Noah did that. According to the tradition, he received what Uriel brought him, and he built what needed to be built. And the world that came after was different from the world that came before. But it was a world. It was livable. It was full of things worth carrying forward. In one of the most enduring stories about the end of one world and the beginning of another, the figure who stood at the threshold of catastrophe and brought the knowledge that made survival possible was the one whose name meant Light of God, the one whose function in the cosmic order was to illuminate the boundary between what is and what is about to be, the one who, centuries later, would be quietly set aside by the tradition that grew from the same ancient root. There is a particular kind of weight to that detail. Once you notice it, the angel of the threshold brought the warning before the flood. Then the tradition that inherited the flood story gradually stopped carrying the name of the one who had brought the warning. That is not an accusation. It is not evidence of a conspiracy or a cover-up. It is simply the kind of thing that happens when traditions make practical decisions about what to carry forward and what to set down, without always being fully aware of everything they are releasing, along with what they intended to release. What was set down, along with Uriel's name, was a particular way of understanding the threshold moment, a particular kind of presence that belongs specifically to the approach of great change, a being whose function is not to fight the change or deliver its arrival as a formal announcement, but to stand at the edge of it, in the last moment of the before, and illuminate what is there for the one who needs to make the crossing. That function did not disappear because the name was set down. The threshold still arrives. Great changes still approach. The last moment of the before still exists. The moment when what is coming is close enough to be known but has not yet arrived. The moment that is most filled with both dread and possibility. The moment when what you do with what you know determines what you carry into the after. In the traditions that remembered him, Uriel is the presence at that moment, the one who stands there with the light. You are not at the edge of a flood tonight. The threshold you are crossing is a smaller and more ordinary one, but it is real. The day that was yours is behind you now. Something else is approaching, and the old tradition that kept this name alive would say that the boundary between what you have been through and what is about to be given to you in the gift of sleep is exactly the kind of threshold where this presence belongs. Let that knowledge rest in you without being analyzed. Let it settle into the body the way the body absorbs warmth. Without effort, without instruction, the warning was delivered. The crossing was survived. The world that came after was different from the world that came before. But it was a world, and it was livable, and it was full of things worth preserving. You are crossing into your own version of the after right now. Let yourself go. There is a map that most Western Christians never see. Not a physical map, though you could draw one if you tried. A map of the Christian world as it actually exists across the full breadth of the earth. Not as it is sometimes imagined from inside the tradition that shaped the modern West. A map that shows not one Christianity moving outward from a single center, carrying a single set of decisions about what to include and what to leave behind, but many Christianities, rooted in different soils, shaped by different histories, preserving different inheritances from the vast and varied world of ancient Jewish and early Christian thought. Most people raised in Western Christian traditions, whether Catholic or Protestant, or any of the dozens of communities that trace themselves through the Reformation and its aftermath, grew up inside a version of Christianity that was shaped, directly or indirectly, by the decisions made in Rome. The canon of scripture they received was the canon that Roman councils had argued over and eventually settled. The theological framework they inherited was the framework that Roman theologians had hammered out through centuries of debate. The things they knew and the things they did not know were, to a significant degree, determined by what Rome had decided to carry forward and what it had decided to set down. But Rome was never the whole of Christianity. It was a center of enormous influence and authority. It was not the only center, and its decisions did not reach everywhere with equal force. In the places where other forms of Christianity took root and grew and developed their own deep traditions, the things Rome had set down were sometimes still carried. The names Rome had stopped using were sometimes kept alive. The theological imagination Rome had narrowed was sometimes allowed to remain wider, not out of defiance, not as a deliberate act of preservation in the face of suppression, but simply because those communities never received the instruction to forget. And so, they did not forget. The story of Uriel in these traditions is the story of ordinary continuity, of a name that remained in use because no one told the communities that used it to stop. The most significant of these communities, in terms of the preservation of Uriel's place in Christian tradition, is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. To understand what makes the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition different in this particular respect, you have to understand its relationship to First Enoch. In the Western biblical tradition, as we have already explored, First Enoch is apocryphal at best. It is a text that scholars study and that theologically curious people explore. But it does not occupy a living place in the inherited faith. It is not read in churches. It is not treated as a source of authoritative teaching. In the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, First Enoch is scripture, not a secondary or supplementary scripture tolerated at the edges of the canon. It is part of the Bible that Ethiopian Orthodox Christians read, hear proclaimed in liturgy, and draw their theological understanding from across an entire lifetime of faith. The Ethiopian biblical canon is broader than the Western canon in ways that have direct and significant consequences for what Ethiopian Christians know and believe about the structure of the spiritual world. Because First Enoch is canonical in Ethiopia, and because First Enoch contains an extensive and detailed account of Uriel's role in the cosmic order, Uriel has never faded from the Ethiopian Christian imagination the way he faded from the Western one. He is not a figure from an obscure text that only specialists read. He is a presence in the scripture that Ethiopian Christians have been hearing since childhood. His name is not unfamiliar or exotic or recovered from ancient obscurity. It is simply part of the landscape of the faith, as it has always been, for the tens of millions of Christians in Ethiopia and in Ethiopian diaspora communities around the world. The question of whether Uriel belongs in the picture is not a question at all. He has always been in the picture. The tradition that would have removed him never had authority over the tradition they inherited. The situation in many Eastern Christian traditions is somewhat different, but points in a similar direction. The Eastern Orthodox churches, the Oriental Orthodox churches, and the various communities of the Christian East developed their theological and liturgical traditions in contexts where Rome's influence reached with varying degrees of force. Many of these traditions maintained extensive angel veneration practices that included figures beyond the three that Rome officially recognized. In many Russian and Byzantine artistic traditions, Uriel appears in icon cycles depicting the seven archangels, painted with the care and theological precision that Orthodox icon-making demands, holding the attributes the tradition associated with him. Placed among the archangels as a matter of course, the icon tradition is worth pausing on, because icons in Orthodox Christianity are not decorative art in the Western sense. They are not illustrations or artistic interpretations. They are theological statements made in the language of paint and gold and precise symbolic imagery, where every detail, every color, every object held in an angelic hand carries specific meaning determined by the theological understanding of the community that produces them. An archangel who appears regularly in Orthodox iconography is an archangel whose existence and specific function the tradition considers worthy of formal theological statement. In these icon cycles, Uriel is typically shown holding a flame or a sword of fire, consistent with the meaning of his name and the functions attributed to him in the texts the Eastern traditions drew on. The flame he carries is not decorative. It is the fire of divine light, the same fire that his name encodes, present in the image as a visual statement of the same theological content that his name carries in words. And then there is the dimension of Jewish mystical and liturgical tradition, which developed over centuries in parallel with the development of Christian theology and maintained its own understanding of the angelic world independent of any Christian canonical decision. Later, Jewish mystical and liturgical traditions, drawing on older symbolic patterns about the four directions and the protection of sacred space, developed the image of four archangels placed around the one at rest: Michael to the right, Gabriel to the left, Raphael ahead, and Uriel behind. Together they enclosed all of space, a guardian at every horizon, a presence in every direction that a human being could face or turn away from. This image found its way into specific devotional practice. In certain Kabbalistic-influenced versions of the bedtime prayer, known as the Kriyat Shema al-Hamita, the recitation of the Shema before sleep, the four archangels are invoked by name, asked to stand at the four directions as guardians through the night. Uriel is the one behind you, the one at your back, the one whose light falls on the direction you cannot see. There is something worth noticing about that placement. In the system that puts Uriel at the west, at the back, at the direction that is behind you when you face the dawn, his position is the position of what is passing away. The west is where the sun sets. It is the direction of endings, of the day that is finishing, of the light that is retreating. To place the archangel of divine light at the point where light is leaving is a theological statement of quiet subtlety. It says that even at the boundary where light is going away, even at the threshold of the ending, there is a presence, a name, a being whose function is to stand exactly there and illuminate that specific quality of crossing the way. All genuine thresholds deserve to be illuminated. These traditions, the Ethiopian canon, the Eastern icon tradition, the Kabbalistic-influenced devotional practice that places four archangels around the one at rest, are not unified. They do not form a single coherent alternative to the Western position. They arrived at their preservation of Uriel through their own distinct historical and theological journeys, and they understand him in ways that differ from each other as well as from the Western tradition. What they share is simply the fact of remembering. Each of them, for its own reasons and through its own particular history, continued to carry the name forward, continued to find it meaningful, continued to include it in the picture of the spiritual world they passed on to their children and their children's children. And what that means, when you step back and look at the whole map, the map that most Western Christians never see, is that Uriel's absence from the Western imagination is a local phenomenon that got mistaken for a universal one. The tradition that shaped the modern West stopped carrying the name, and because that tradition became so globally influential, the absence felt like the natural state of things. It felt like Uriel had simply never been very important, had never been very present, had existed only at the margins of a tradition that had good reasons for leaving him there. But the map tells a different story. The map shows a name that is alive in the highlands of Ethiopia, present in many of the icon rooms of Orthodox monasteries, spoken before sleep in the prayers of communities who never received the instruction to forget it. Uriel did not disappear from Christianity. He disappeared from one version of it. The other versions remembered. And tonight, in this quiet room, in this hour that belongs to neither waking nor sleep, you are touching the edge of what they remembered. Let the breath slow to its own rhythm. Let the image of that larger map rest somewhere in the back of the mind. The map that shows the name alive in all the places that kept it. The night is wide enough to hold all of it. In 1667, a blind man in London finished a poem. He had been working on it for years. Through political collapse and personal loss and the complete failure of the project he had devoted much of his adult life to, he had believed in the English Commonwealth, the experiment in republican government that replaced the monarchy under Oliver Cromwell, and he had watched that experiment end and the monarchy return. And he had survived the aftermath through a combination of circumstance and the intervention of people who believed that what he was writing was too important to allow the usual consequences to proceed. By the time the poem was finished, John Milton was in his late 50s. He had been blind for more than a decade. He composed in his head and dictated to his daughters, building a work of enormous complexity and ambition entirely from memory, and from the vast interior library he had assembled in the years when his eyes still worked. The poem was Paradise Lost. It is one of the most significant works in the English language, and its significance is not only literary. Milton was attempting something in Paradise Lost that went beyond the creation of a great epic poem. He was trying to retell the entire story of Christian cosmology. From the war in heaven, through the fall of Satan, through the creation of the world, through the temptation and fall of Adam and Eve, in a way that would make the structure of Christian belief visible and emotionally real to a readership that knew the content of the Bible but needed to feel its architecture. He wanted to do what he described in his opening lines as justifying the ways of God to men, not explaining them in the abstract, making them felt. To do that, he needed an angelic world that was populated and specific, angels with voices and personalities and particular functions in the unfolding of the cosmic drama, not a vague background presence of spiritual beings, but individuals with roles that mattered to the story. And when he built that world, drawing from a broad inheritance of biblical, classical, and extra-biblical angelic traditions, where certain figures had long been associated with light and sight, and the boundary between the known and the unknown, John Milton kept Uriel in Book 3 of Paradise Lost. Satan has escaped from hell and is making his way toward the newly created world where he intends to find and corrupt the human beings placed there. He needs a guide. He needs someone who can tell him where to go and how to find what he is looking for. And the being he encounters, the one he chooses to deceive in order to get that information, is Uriel. Milton's Uriel stands on the sun. Not metaphorically. Literally, he is the regent of the sun, the archangel whose domain is the great source of light at the center of the solar system, the being whose function is to govern and embody the light that illuminates the created world. When Satan arrives, disguised as a lesser angel, filled with apparent enthusiasm to see God's new creation, it is Uriel who receives him. It is Uriel whose perception Satan needs to fool. And it is Uriel who is described, in one of the most striking phrases in the entire poem, as the sharpest-sighted spirit in all of heaven. The sharpest-sighted spirit in all of heaven. Milton is being precise with that phrase. He is saying something specific about what Uriel is and what his function in the cosmic order is. Uriel is the one who sees most clearly, the one whose perception penetrates furthest, the one whose capacity to see the truth about things exceeds that of any other being in the heavenly host. His domain is light, and his gift is sight. And in the logic of the poem, those two things are the same thing, expressed in two different registers. And yet Satan fools him. That detail is theologically exact in a way that a careless writer would not have achieved. Satan's disguise works not because Uriel is dim or inattentive, but because the specific kind of deception Satan employs. The performance of virtue, the mimicry of genuine devotion, is invisible to even the sharpest perception. When the deceiver is skilled enough, Uriel can see everything that is actually present. He cannot see what is absent, what has been replaced by a perfect performance of something that is not there. His clarity is absolute within its domain, but the domain of visibility has edges, and at those edges, in the space between what is present and what is only performed, even the sharpest sighted spirit can be deceived. This is not a failure in Milton's Uriel. It is a revelation of something important about the nature of light and the nature of perception. Light shows you what is there. It cannot show you the absence hiding behind a perfect performance of presence. That limitation is not a weakness in the light. It is simply a feature of what light is. And Milton, who was thinking about these things at the deepest level, understood that the deception of Uriel was not a flaw in the cosmic architecture, but a precise statement about what deception is and how it works. There is also the image itself, which deserves to be held for a moment. A blindman, in the darkness of his lost sight, dictating to his daughters, building in language a vision of the Archangel of light standing on the surface of the sun, described as the one who sees most clearly in all of heaven. The resonance between Milton's own blindness and his portrait of the angel of divine light is the kind of resonance that comes from a writer who has lived long enough inside a subject to know its deepest ironies. He kept Uriel not because anyone asked him to, not because he was engaged in a deliberate act of preservation of something endangered, but because when he looked at the architecture of the story he was telling, at the structure of the cosmic drama he was trying to make real, he saw that there was a space that needed filling, a threshold that needed a guardian, a moment of crossing that needed a being of light, and the name that fit that space, the name whose meaning and function were exactly suited to that moment in the poem, was the name that Rome had set aside 900 years before Milton sat down to dictate. That is what it looks like when a name survives by being true to something real. Institutions manage lists. They decide what names go on them and what names come off. And they have reasons for their decisions. Sometimes good reasons. Sometimes reasons that are more about what can be easily administered than about what is deeply true. And the names that come off the list sometimes fade, growing quieter and less present across the generations until most people have forgotten they were ever there. But names that are attached to something real tend to find their way back. They persist in the places where the things they are true to persist. They surface when a writer of sufficient learning and sufficient vision looks at the shape of a story and discovers that the missing presence has a name after all. Paradise Lost was published in 1667. 922 years after the council that had set Uriel's name aside, and in Book 3, on the surface of the sun, the sharpest sighted spirit in all of heaven was standing exactly where he had always stood, at the threshold, in the light. Let that image carry you a little further into the quiet. The blind poet and the angel of light, the name that survived by being necessary, the threshold that was always there, waiting for the presence that belonged to it. We are moving now toward the center of the story. Let the body grow heavier. Let the thoughts that are still circling grow quieter. We are going somewhere you have not been yet tonight, and it is closer than you think. At some point in a story like this one, the question has to be answered directly, not hinted at, not approached from the side, through careful implication. Answered, because the question is real. The people who made the decision were real. The reasons they gave were real. And treating those reasons as something to be exposed or condemned rather than understood does a disservice to the actual complexity of what happened. Why did the Roman tradition set Uriel aside? The short answer is that it was not about Uriel specifically. It was about a problem that the Church had been managing, with varying degrees of success, for centuries, before the Council of 745, and that it would continue managing for centuries afterward. The problem was the gap between official theology and popular practice, the gap between what the Church taught in its councils and its carefully reasoned theological frameworks, and what ordinary people actually believed and did in the living texture of their daily religious lives. That gap has always existed in every religious tradition that has ever tried to organize the spiritual lives of large numbers of ordinary human beings across diverse geographies and cultures and historical moments. The official version of the faith is always cleaner, more systematic, more internally consistent than the version that lives in the prayers and practices and instincts of the people. And the official version is always, to some degree, in tension with the popular version, always trying to shape it, correct it, bring it into alignment with the theological standards the tradition has established. In the 8th century, one of the most persistent manifestations of that gap was angel veneration. People loved angels, not in the abstract, theological way that official church teaching encouraged, where angels were understood as messengers and servants of God, whose veneration was always subordinate to the worship owed to God alone. In the popular religious imagination, angels were much more than that. They were beings of enormous personal power and personal presence. They had names and personalities and specific areas of authority. They could be approached directly, invoked by name, asked for assistance with specific problems. This was not a small or marginal phenomenon. It was widespread and deeply embedded in popular practice across the regions where Latin Christianity had established itself. And from the perspective of church authorities trying to maintain a clear theological distinction between the worship owed to God alone and the veneration appropriate for created beings, it was a genuine concern. The specific context for the Council of 745 included, according to church records of the period, the case of a wandering holy man named Adalbert, who had been drawing large followings in the Frankish territories, invoking angel names in ways the church considered theologically unsafe, and embodying the kind of charismatic popular religion that institutional authority found genuinely threatening to the coherence of the faith. The council addressed Adalbert directly, but it also addressed the broader pattern that Adalbert represented. The question the council asked was simple. Does this name appear in Scripture? Specifically, in the canon of Scripture that the Roman Church recognized as authoritative. By that standard, 3 names survived without difficulty: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael. Their presence in the authorized texts was clear and undeniable. Their canonical standing could be pointed to and defended within the established boundaries of authorized Scripture. Uriel was not in those texts, not with the clarity and canonical weight of the other 3. He existed in First Enoch, but First Enoch was not canonical in the Roman tradition. He appeared in Second Esdras in a form, but that text occupied an uncertain and contested position at the edges of the Western canon. He was present in the popular religious imagination and in manuscripts that circulated outside official channels. But the criterion was canonical presence, and by that criterion his standing was uncertain, and so the council placed him outside the set of officially sanctioned names. It is worth being precise about what that meant and what it did not mean. The council did not declare Uriel to be a false angel. It did not declare that anyone who had prayed to him had done something wrong. It did not order his image destroyed or his name struck from existing texts. It simply declined to include him in the set of angel names the Roman Church officially endorsed for veneration. It moved him from the category of officially sanctioned to the category of officially unsanctioned, which in practice meant the category of things that gradually faded from official religious life as the tradition moved forward. The Vatican's position today reflects the same underlying logic applied with the same consistency across 13 centuries. Current guidelines for Catholic popular piety discourage the use of angel names that do not appear in Scripture. For the same reason that motivated the Council of 745, if a name cannot be verified through authorized text, the nature and trustworthiness of the being attached to that name cannot be guaranteed. And devotion directed at an unverified being carries theological risks that a responsible tradition should caution against. This is a coherent position. It is possible to disagree with it, and many people within the broader Christian world do disagree with it. The tens of millions of Ethiopian Orthodox Christians for whom First Enoch is canonical scripture have a very different framework for what counts as verified. The Eastern Orthodox communities whose icon traditions have depicted Uriel for centuries are working from a different understanding of what constitutes authorized tradition. The disagreement is real, and it is principled on all sides. But the Roman position is not irrational. It is not motivated by malice or by a desire to suppress something that someone found threatening. It is motivated by a genuine pastoral concern about the integrity and safety of popular religious practice. A tradition that cares about the people it serves has to make decisions about what it can confidently endorse. The Roman Church made those decisions by the criterion of canonical presence. By that criterion, 3 names were verifiable and Uriel was not. What makes the story worth telling is not that the Church made a wrong decision in 745. It is that every decision a tradition makes about what to carry forward and what to set down has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate problem the decision was designed to solve. The immediate problem was angel veneration running beyond sanctioned channels. The immediate solution was a shorter list of officially endorsed names. The immediate consequence was a more controlled landscape of popular piety, with clearer boundaries around what could be officially acknowledged. But the longer consequence, the one that accumulated slowly across more than 12 centuries, was the gradual disappearance from the Western Christian imagination of an entire dimension of the ancient religious world. Not because anyone intended that disappearance, not because it was the goal, but because institutions, when they draw their lines, do not always fully see what they are leaving behind. And what gets left behind does not always disappear. Sometimes it waits. In the Ethiopian highlands, it waited inside a canon that had never been revised to exclude it. In the icon rooms of the Christian East, it waited inside images that continued to be painted and venerated through all the centuries of Western forgetting. In the devotional practices of communities that had never stopped speaking the name before sleep, it waited inside the living prayers of people who found it meaningful enough to keep. A decision made in a room in Rome in 745 did not destroy Uriel. It began an absence, and the absence, as absence tend to do, shaped everything that grew up inside it, without ever fully knowing that it was there. The council made a decision that made sense in its moment, for reasons that had a coherent logic. What it could not see, what no decision-maker ever fully sees, was the full shape of what they were deciding. The immediate problem and the long-term consequence are almost never visible at the same time from the same vantage point. 745 solved a problem. It also began a silence, and the silence, as you lie here in this particular darkness, at the edge of sleep, at the threshold of your own small crossing from one order of consciousness to another, is what tonight has been slowly filling, with a name, with a history, with everything the name was carrying when it was set down, and everything it has been carrying since. In all the places that never let it go, let that settle now. Let the quiet of the room absorb everything that has been said. We are moving into the deeper part of the night, the part where the words slow down and the space between them grows wider. There is a quality to this hour that is unlike any other hour of the day. Not late evening, when the world is still winding down and the mind is still processing the accumulated weight of everything that happened since morning. Not early morning, when the light is beginning again and the body is remembering what it is like to be awake and facing the day. This particular hour, the one you are in right now, has a quality of its own that no other part of the full cycle of light and dark quite replicates. It is the threshold hour. The ancient world knew about this hour. Every tradition that paid serious attention to the relationship between waking and sleeping, between the consciousness that moves through the daylit world and the consciousness that moves through whatever world sleep opens into, knew that there was something particular about the moment of crossing, something that warranted acknowledgement, something that deserved a name, a prayer, a practice of some kind that honored the fact that this was not simply the end of one thing, but the beginning of something genuinely different, something that the waking mind, for all its competence in the world it was built to navigate, does not have full access to. You are in that moment right now. The thoughts that were moving through you an hour ago, the ones with edges and urgency and the specific weight of things that feel like they need to be resolved. Those thoughts are softer now, not gone, perhaps, but their edges have rounded. Their urgency has gentled. The part of your mind that insists on managing and preparing and staying ahead of what comes next has begun, very slowly, to loosen its hold. This is the threshold. This is the place that many traditions associated with Uriel. Not in a way that requires you to adopt any specific theological framework or hold any particular belief about archangels or the structure of the cosmos, but in the sense that the human beings who named that quality of presence, who gave it a name and a function and a place in their understanding of how the world worked, were pointing at something real, something that the experience of lying at the edge of sleep, night after night, across an entire human lifetime, gives you direct and personal access to. There is something here, at the edge of sleep, something that is not quite the waking world and not quite the sleeping world, a quality of awareness that is more spacious than the focused, purposeful awareness of the day, and more present than the dissolved awareness of deep sleep. A place where the boundary between what you know and what you do not know becomes, for a little while, more permeable than it usually is. In the language of the traditions that remembered Uriel, this is his territory, the threshold between waking and sleep, the boundary between one order of consciousness and another, the place where the known gives way to the unknown in the most ordinary and recurring way that a human life contains. Many traditions place Uriel at the direction that is behind you, at your back, facing the west, the direction of the setting sun, the direction of what is passing away, the direction you cannot see when you are facing forward into the day. In the threshold hour, that image lands differently than it does at any other time. In the waking world, the direction behind you is a practical matter. You can turn around, you can check. The behindness of behind is not a permanent condition. It is just a direction you are not currently facing, easily remedied by a simple movement. But here, in this slow dissolution of the body's insistence on managing its relationship to space, the direction behind you becomes something else. It becomes the direction of everything you are releasing. The conversations that did not go the way you hoped, the decisions that are still unresolved, the accumulated weight of a day that asked more of you than you perhaps had available to give. All of it is behind you now. All of it is in the direction that you are not facing as sleep approaches. And in that direction, in the language of the traditions that kept this name alive, there is a light, not a light that demands anything, not a light that illuminates for the purpose of exposure or the revelation of things you would rather not see. A light that simply is. A light whose presence at the threshold means that the crossing is not unminded, that the passing from one order of consciousness to another happens in the presence of something that knows what crossings are, that has stood at this boundary more times than any human mind can count, that was given its name and its function, specifically because this place, this edge between the known and the unknown, is real. You do not have to invoke that presence to feel the truth it points toward. You only have to be here, in this particular quality of awareness, in this hour that belongs to neither waking nor sleep, in this soft and spacious place where the edges of things have gentled and the urgency of the day has finally, blessedly, begun to let you go. The light at the threshold is not a symbol that points beyond itself to something else. It is the actual quality of this moment, the luminosity that belongs specifically to the place where the known gives way to the unknown, the clarity that arrives, sometimes, in the last few minutes before sleep, when the managing mind has released enough of its grip that something more spacious can briefly be present. That quality has always been here, in every threshold hour of every human life ever lived, in the darkness of caves and the silence of desert nights and the small hours of cities that never fully go quiet. The threshold has always been the threshold. The crossing has always been the crossing. The name is one way of pointing at what is here. This moment is another. Let your body be heavy now. Let the breath slow to its own rhythm without any assistance from you. Let the thoughts that are still moving find their way to stillness, the way water finds its way to level. Not by being forced, but by being given enough time and enough quiet. The threshold is here. The light is here. You are crossing now. There is nothing you need to do. Nothing you need to carry with you into whatever waits on the other side of this moment. Rest into it. The way you rest into warmth. The way you rest into the knowledge that the night is long and there is nowhere you need to be until morning. In the language of the traditions that remembered him, you are in his territory now, and that territory was imagined, across many of the traditions that kept his name alive, as the place where the light at the boundary is present, not to demand anything, but simply to illuminate the crossing for the one who is making it. The ancient world gave a name to what stands here. You are there now. There is a section of First Enoch that most people never reach, even those who have heard of the text and know something about its contents, who have read the opening chapters about the fallen angels and the flood and the journey of Enoch through the heavens, often stop before they reach the part that scholars call the astronomical book. It begins around chapter 72 and continues through chapter 82, and by the standards of ancient religious literature, it is a very strange and very specific piece of writing. It does not read like mythology. It does not read like vision or prophecy. In certain passages, it reads almost like a technical manual. It is a detailed account of the movements of the sun and the moon, as that ancient tradition understood them. The lengths of days and nights across the different seasons, the gates through which the sun rises and sets at different times of year. 12 gates in total. 6 on the eastern horizon and 6 on the western, each corresponding to a specific period of the solar calendar as First Enoch conceived it. The relationship between the solar year and the lunar year, the way they diverge across a 4-year cycle, and the correction required to bring them back into alignment according to that ancient reckoning. The behavior of the stars, the directions of the winds, the systematic architecture of time as that specific cosmological vision understood it, and the one who explains all of it to Enoch, who takes him to the gates and shows him how they work within this ancient framework, who describes the path of the sun with a precision that suggests intimate familiarity rather than second-hand knowledge, is Uriel. The Uriel of the astronomical book is not the guardian of cosmic prisons we met earlier in the text. He is not the warner who brought the message to Noah. He is something that might seem almost mundane by comparison. He is a teacher of the heavens as that ancient world understood them, a guide to the structure of time as First Enoch conceived it, a being whose knowledge of the calendar and the movement of the stars within that tradition's framework is so thorough and so specific that he can walk a human consciousness through the entire architecture of how time is built, gate by gate, season by season, with the patience and precision of someone who has been watching these processes unfold since before any human eye was present to observe them. The more you sit with that image, the less mundane it seems. The ancient world did not draw the boundary between astronomy and theology in the same place we draw it today. For us, the movements of celestial bodies are physical phenomena, governed by the laws of orbital mechanics. Beautiful and fascinating, but not inherently sacred. The science of how the sun moves through the sky and how the seasons change is a branch of physics. We can study and admire the precision of the cosmos without feeling that the precision points beyond itself to something that requires a name and a relationship. The tradition that produced First Enoch worked from a different understanding entirely. For the ancient Jewish religious imagination that gave us First Enoch, the structure of time was not simply a physical fact to be measured, but a theological reality to be honored. The calendar was not an administrative convenience. It was a sacred architecture, a system built into the fabric of creation itself, reflecting the order and intention of the one who had designed the world. To know the calendar accurately, to understand the movements of the sun and moon and the relationship between them as that tradition described them, was not merely technical knowledge by the standards of that world. It was, within that ancient framework, the knowledge of how created time was structured, which was a form of the knowledge of the Creator. This means that Uriel's role in the astronomical book is not a departure from his function as the angel of divine light and cosmic thresholds. It is a specific expression of that function. He is the one who illuminates the structure of time itself as that ancient vision understood it. His domain includes the architecture of the calendar, the gates of the sun, the precise ordering of days and seasons within that cosmological framework. His light is not only the light that stands at the boundary between the known and the unknown, it is also the light that makes the structure of time visible, that allows a human consciousness to see the order underlying the apparently arbitrary passage of days. There is something in that function that crosses the distance between the ancient world and the present one more easily than many ancient religious ideas do. We still live in time. We still experience the passage of seasons. We still feel, in some part of ourselves, older than our capacity for abstract reasoning, the weight of the moments when one phase of time gives way to another. The solstice, the equinox, the evening when the year turns, and something that felt permanent reveals itself to have been temporary all along. These moments still carry weight, even in a thoroughly secular modern life. They still produce a quality of feeling that the language of physics and orbital mechanics does not quite satisfy. The ancient world would have said that feeling is appropriate, that the moments when time crosses its own internal thresholds are real moments when the structure of the cosmos is, in some sense, more visible than usual, and the being whose function was to stand at those thresholds and illuminate them, whose knowledge of the architecture of time was exact enough within that ancient framework to show a human consciousness the gates through which the sun passes, would have been understood as the natural presence at those moments. Uriel, in the astronomical book of First Enoch, is the angel who knows when. He knows when the sun rises through which gate according to that ancient reckoning. He knows when the days are longest and when they are shortest. He knows the precise count of days in each month within that cosmological vision, and the correction required to keep the solar and lunar calendars aligned across the years. He knows the structure of time so thoroughly, within the framework of First Enoch, that he can teach it, can walk someone else through it with enough detail and precision that the listener comes away understanding not just what time does, but how it is built according to that ancient vision. That kind of intimacy with the structure of created time, the knowledge of how it is built within a sacred cosmological framework, points at something that the ancient world considered deeply significant. It is the knowledge of someone who Who was present when the architecture was established? Who has been watching the sun move through its gates, season after season, for a span of time so vast that the whole of human history is something that happened recently? Let that perspective rest in you for a moment. The patience of a being for whom the turning of seasons is a rhythm observed across a span that makes the entire recorded history of human civilization seem brief. For whom the architecture of the calendar is not an abstraction but a lived familiarity. The way a musician who has played the same piece 10,000 times has a relationship with its structure that is qualitatively different from someone hearing it for the first time. The astronomical book gives us a Uriel who has that perspective, who stands at the gates of the sun not as a witness, but as someone for whom those gates are as familiar as the rooms of a house returned to across an entire lifetime, who teaches Enoch the structure of time not from a text, but from direct and sustained familiarity with the thing itself, within the cosmological vision that First Enoch preserves. And this Uriel, the Uriel who knows the architecture of time as that ancient tradition understood it, was the one the Western tradition stopped carrying forward. What is lost when that figure is no longer part of the living religious imagination? Not lost in the sense of inaccessible. First, Enoch still exists. The astronomical book is still there, still readable, still available to anyone who looks for it, but lost in the sense of no longer being present in the instinctive, inherited, absorbed through childhood understanding of what the spiritual world is like and what kinds of presences inhabit it. What is lost, specifically, is a particular way of understanding the relationship between the sacred and the structure of time. The understanding that the calendar carries a meaning its physical description does not fully capture. That the moments when time crosses its own internal thresholds have a presence associated with them, a name that the ancient world spoke at those moments as a way of acknowledging what was actually happening. The absence of that understanding is not catastrophic. The world turns without it. The seasons change without it. But something in the human relationship to time, to the sacred quality of time's great turnings, went quieter when the name the ancient world associated with those moments stopped being spoken in the tradition that shaped the Western imagination. Not silent, quieter, and quieter is not the same as gone. The gates are still there. The sun still moves through them. The threshold moments still carry their weight. And in the traditions that never forgot his name, the Archangel who knows when is still present at those moments, still standing at the gates through which the light passes, still illuminating the architecture of time for anyone with the patience to look. You are in one of those threshold moments right now, not the solstice or the equinox, the threshold of sleep, the moment when the light of waking consciousness begins its nightly retreat through its own internal gate, and the different kind of awareness that belongs to sleep begins its approach. Uriel knows this gate too. He knows all the gates through which light passes. Let the knowledge of that settle into you. Let the architecture of this particular threshold become something felt rather than analyzed, present rather than thought about. The day has moved through its arc. The light has retreated. The gate is here, and the one who knows the gates is here with it. The breath is very slow now, the body very still. Let the next words carry you gently forward into the part of the night where the knowing becomes something quieter than thought. The breath is slow now. The body is settling. Let what comes next arrive gently. Something else has been waiting to find you tonight. There is another text, not First Enoch this time, a different book. From a different moment in the development of ancient Jewish and early Christian thought, preserved in a different way and carrying a different kind of weight in the Western tradition. A book that exists in a complicated and interesting position relative to the Western biblical canon, neither fully inside it nor fully outside it, present in certain editions of Scripture for centuries without ever quite being claimed as central. The way a guest who has stayed past the original invitation sometimes occupies a room that is both theirs and not quite theirs. The book is known by several names, which is itself a sign of its complicated history. In some traditions it is called Second Esdras. In others it is called Fourth Ezra. In the Latin Vulgate, the great translation of the Bible that shaped Western Christianity for more than 1,000 years, it appears as an appendix, attached to the main body of Scripture but formally outside it. Present, but not entirely belonging. In the King James Bible it appears in the section called the Apocrypha, the collection of texts that most Protestant traditions set aside as non-canonical but considered worthy of reading. In various Eastern Christian traditions it occupies different positions in different canonical systems, sometimes more central and sometimes more peripheral. What this means practically is that Second Esdras is a text that many Western Christians technically have access to through their own tradition without knowing it. It is not a hidden book. It is not a text that was suppressed or destroyed. It has been sitting in editions of the Bible for centuries, in the appendix, or the apocryphal section, available to anyone who thought to look. Most people simply never looked, because the tradition did not direct their attention there. And in this book, Uriel appears, not the Uriel of First Enoch, a different version of the same presence, a Uriel whose function in this text is unlike his function in any other text where he appears, and who, for that reason, adds a dimension to the picture that nothing else in the tradition quite provides. The book tells the story of a man named Ezra, living in the aftermath of the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile of the Jewish people to Babylon. The historical setting is one of the most traumatic moments in the entire Jewish experience. The temple has been destroyed. The holy city has been reduced to ruins. The people who understood themselves to be in a special relationship with God, the chosen recipients of divine protection and divine promise, are living in captivity in a foreign land, trying to make sense of how the world they believed in could have produced the world they are living in. Ezra is trying to answer a question, not a small question, not a question with a simple answer available somewhere if you look hard enough. The question is this: how can a just God allow this? How can the God who made promises to this people, who established a covenant with them, who was understood to be present in the temple that now lies in ruins, how can that God have allowed what happened to happen? How can the scales of divine justice have produced an outcome in which the people who tried to be faithful are suffering, while the people who destroyed their city and their world are prospering? It is the oldest and most persistent theological question human beings have ever asked. The question of suffering, the question of justice, the question of how the world that exists can be reconciled with the God that faith describes. And it is Uriel who is sent to answer him, or more precisely, it is Uriel who is sent to show him why the answer is not available in the form Ezra is looking for. This is what makes the Uriel of Second Esdras so different from every other version of Uriel in the tradition. He does not come with comfort. He does not come with reassurance that everything will be all right, that the suffering has a purpose, that justice will eventually be served in a way that makes the current pain comprehensible. He comes with questions. Uriel asks Ezra to weigh fire, to measure the wind, to call back a day that has already passed. Ezra says that no one can do those things. They are impossible. They belong to a different order of being than the human one. And Uriel says, yes, and in the same way that you cannot weigh fire or measure wind or call back yesterday, you cannot understand the ways of God from inside the limitations of a human mind in its current condition. The gap between the question you are asking and the kind of mind that could adequately answer it is the same gap as the gap between the task of weighing fire and the hands you have available to weigh it with. This is a remarkable thing for an angel to say. Most angelic visitations in ancient religious literature come with answers. Gabriel comes with announcements. Raphael comes with healing. Michael comes with victory. The conventional function of an angelic messenger is to bring something from the divine realm to the human one, to close the gap between what God knows and what the human being in front of the angel needs to know. Uriel, in Second Esdras, does something different. He comes not to close the gap, but to make the gap visible, to illuminate with the specific quality of light that his name suggests. The precise shape and size of the distance between what Ezra wants to understand and what Ezra is capable of understanding with the instruments currently available to him. He does not say that Ezra's question is wrong. He does not say that the pain is inappropriate or the anger misplaced. He takes the question seriously enough to explain why it cannot be answered in the terms in which it has been asked. He treats Ezra as someone who can bear the truth of his own limitation, which is a different kind of respect than the comfort that most religious answers offer. That is a different kind of illumination than the illumination of the gates of the sun, or the illumination of the threshold between worlds. It is the illumination of limitation itself, the clarifying light that falls not on a path forward, but on the edge of what the path can reach. Uriel, in this text, is the one who shows you the boundary of what human understanding can hold, and who does so with enough honesty and enough care for the person asking that the showing becomes, in its own way, a form of mercy. There is something in that function that is both more uncomfortable and more honest than the comfort that most angelic visitations offer. It does not resolve the theological problem that Ezra is wrestling with. It does not make the suffering comprehensible or the justice visible. What it does is give Ezra a more accurate map of the territory, a map that includes the edges of the knowable, that does not pretend those edges are farther away than they are, that honors the genuine reality of the distance between the human mind and the full scope of what there is to understand. Most of us spend a significant portion of our lives trying to avoid that map. We prefer the version of the spiritual world that offers resolution to the version that offers clarity about the limits of resolution. We prefer the angel who brings answers to the angel who illuminates why certain answers are not currently available. We prefer the comfort of a closed question to the discomfort of one that must remain open. But the open question is often the more honest one, and the one who stands at the boundary of what can be understood, who illuminates that boundary rather than pretending it is not there, is doing something that requires a particular kind of courage on the part of the recipient. The courage to let the question remain open, the courage to sit with the weight of not knowing without either forcing a false resolution or collapsing under the weight of uncertainty. Ezra, in the rest of the book, finds a kind of peace, not the peace of having his question answered, the peace of having been taken seriously enough for his unanswerable question to be acknowledged as genuinely unanswerable by a being in a position to know, the peace of having been shown the true shape of the territory rather than a simplified version designed to make him feel better before sending him on his way. That is what Uriel gave him, not comfort in the ordinary sense, something more durable than comfort, a truthful account of where he actually was. This version of Uriel, the one who comes with questions rather than answers, who illuminates the boundaries of understanding rather than opening paths through them, is the one that most Western Christians could find in their own Bibles if they knew to look. He has been there in the appendix of the Vulgate, in the Apocrypha of the King James Version, for centuries, waiting in the part of the book that most people skip, not because he was hidden, because the tradition stopped directing attention toward him, because the question he is associated with, the question of how a just God can allow unjust suffering, is a question that most traditions prefer to answer rather than to sit with. And Uriel, in Second Esdras, is the one who comes to say that sitting with it, fully and honestly, is sometimes the more truthful choice. That is an uncomfortable message. It is also, for many people who encounter it in the right moment, one of the most relieving things they have ever heard, Because there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to force an answer onto a question that has none available to you. And there is a particular kind of rest that becomes possible when a presence you trust tells you that your inability to answer it is not a failure of your faith or your intelligence or your devotion. It is simply the shape of the territory. The fire cannot be weighed. The wind cannot be measured. The day that has passed cannot be called back. And you, lying here in this darkness, at the edge of sleep, do not need to have resolved anything tonight. The questions can stay open. They will still be there in the morning, patient and unchanged, waiting for whatever light the next day brings. For now, the threshold is here, the crossing is here, and in the language of the ancient text that preserved this version of his presence, the one who stands at the boundaries of what can be understood has already seen the shape of everything you are carrying. You do not need to explain it. You do not need to resolve it. You only need to rest. There is a particular kind of loss that is very difficult to grieve. Not the loss of something you had and then lost. That kind of loss is painful, but it has a clear shape. You know what was there. You know what is absent now. The grief has an object, something specific to mourn, something whose absence you can point to and say, that is what I am missing. The difficult kind of loss is the loss of something you never had, something that was set down before you arrived, something whose absence shaped the world you grew up in so completely and so quietly that you never knew there was a shape to mourn. You simply grew up inside a world that had already been narrowed, already been edited, already had certain things removed from it before you ever opened your eyes inside it. And because the narrowing happened before you arrived, you never felt the loss directly. You simply lived inside it, not knowing that the space you occupied had once been larger. That is the kind of loss we are talking about when we talk about what the Western Christian tradition set down in 745. The people who made the decision did not experience it as a loss. From where they were standing, they were solving a problem. They were protecting ordinary people from the theological risks associated with directing devotion toward beings whose nature could not be verified through authorized text. From the inside of that decision, in that moment, it looked like responsible stewardship. It looked like the kind of careful and unglamorous work that maintaining a tradition across centuries requires, and in the most immediate sense, it was. But canon is only one part of the story. Liturgy, prayer, art, and popular devotion decide what people actually remember, and the narrowing works its way through all of those channels. Not just the official list of authorized names, through liturgy, which shapes what people hear and say in their most formative religious moments. Through prayer, which shapes the vocabulary of the most intimate conversations people have with the sacred. Through art, which shapes the visual landscape of what the spiritual world looks like in the imagination. Through popular devotion, which shapes the instinctive and absorbed understanding of how the cosmos is structured and what kinds of presences inhabit it. All of those things are affected when a name is removed from the official list. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, across generations. The name that is no longer in the liturgy becomes the name that is no longer in the prayer. The name that is no longer in the prayer becomes the name that is no longer in the art. Let that chain rest in you for a moment. Liturgy to prayer, to art, to imagination, to silence. The name that is no longer in the art becomes the name that is no longer in the imagination. And the name that is no longer in the imagination becomes the name that the next generation grows up not knowing. What the Western tradition lost when it narrowed its angel list in 745 was not simply Uriel as a name, it was everything that Uriel as a name was pointing at. Consider what that function was. Assembled from everything we have moved through tonight, Uriel was the presence at the threshold, the one who stood at the boundary between the known and the unknown and illuminated what was there. the one who made the crossing possible for the consciousness that needed to make the crossing but could not make it alone, the one whose light fell on the edge of things and made the edge visible rather than merely terrifying. You have felt something of that tonight. Perhaps the way this hour has a quality of its own, the way the threshold of sleep is real, not just a biological event. That recognition is part of what Uriel's name was always pointing at. Let those two rest for a moment before the next. Uriel was the one who knew the architecture of time as the ancient world understood it, the one whose domain included the structure of the calendar, the gates of the sun, the precise ordering of days and seasons within that ancient cosmological framework, the one who could show a human being not just that time passes but how it is built according to that vision. Uriel was the one who brought the warning at the threshold of catastrophe, the one who stood at the edge of the coming destruction and delivered the knowledge that made survival possible, the one whose function was not to fight the change but to illuminate it while there was still time to act. Uriel was the one who illuminated the boundaries of understanding, the one who came not with answers but with a truthful account of where the limits of answering were located, the one who honored the unanswerable question by naming its unanswerability rather than papering over it with a resolution that would not hold. Each of those functions points at something real in the human experience of the sacred, the experience of standing at the threshold of sleep or death or great change and needing something to illuminate what is there, the experience of feeling the turning of time and sensing that the calendar carries a meaning its administrative function does not fully capture, the experience of receiving a warning that changes what is possible, the experience of being met in the place of the unanswerable question and being told, truthfully, that the inability to answer it is not a failure. These are not abstract theological categories. They are experiences, real, recurring, deeply human experiences that people in every tradition and every century have had and will continue to have. They are part of the permanent furniture of human spiritual life, as reliably present as grief and gratitude and the particular quality of awe that arrives without invitation in the presence of things too large for the ordinary mind to hold. The traditions that kept Uriel's name alive kept alive a way of pointing at those experiences, a way of saying, this domain of human spiritual life has a presence associated with it. This category of experience has a name, the threshold, the turning of time, the warning at the edge of catastrophe, the boundary of understanding. These are not simply things that happen to you and then pass. They are territories and territories. In the ancient understanding, have guardians. When the Western tradition stopped carrying that name forward, those experiences did not go away. The threshold still arrives every night. The calendar still turns. The unanswerable question still sits at the center of every serious engagement with the problem of suffering. These things did not disappear because the name associated with them was removed from the official list, but they became nameless. In the tradition that shaped the Western imagination, they became experiences that happened without a framework for understanding what they were, without the figure whose function had always been to stand at exactly those moments and illuminate them. A nameless experience is not the same as a non-existent one, but it is a harder experience to integrate, harder to honor, harder to pass on to the next generation in a form that allows the next generation to recognize it when it arrives in their own lives. The name is not the experience, but the name is part of how the experience gets transmitted across the distance of time. It is part of how a tradition says to its children, this thing that will happen to you, this particular quality of encounter with the sacred, has happened to people before you. It has a name. You are not alone in it. When the name is gone, some of that transmission goes with it. The Western tradition narrowed in 745. It did so for reasons that were not unreasonable. And across the 12 centuries since that narrowing, the full scope of what was set down has gradually become visible, not as a catastrophe, not as a deliberate suppression, but as a quieting, a slow reduction in the vocabulary available for certain kinds of spiritual experience. That loss is not irreversible. The texts still exist. The name still exists. The traditions that kept it alive still exist and are very much present in the world. The Ethiopian highlands still know the name. The icon rooms of the Christian East still hold his image. The pages of First Enoch still carry his voice. And tonight, in this quiet room, in this threshold hour, you are touching something that was set down a long time ago and has been waiting, with the patience that belongs to things that are true, for someone to come this way again. You do not have to carry it anywhere. You do not have to do anything with it. You only have to know that it is here. That is enough. For tonight, that is more than enough. Not everything that was set down in 745 stayed down. That is the thing about names that are attached to something real. You can remove them from the official list. You can stop including them in the authorized liturgy. You can allow them to fade from the theology that gets taught and debated and passed down through the formal channels of a tradition. But you cannot always reach the places where those names have taken root in the human imagination. You cannot always get to the artists. Artists work with images, with the felt sense of things, with the visual and emotional language that carries meaning in ways that doctrinal statements sometimes cannot. And the people who made the art of the Christian tradition, the craftsmen who cut and laid the stained glass, the icon painters who prepared their boards and mixed their pigments according to methods passed down across generations, the poets who worked in the spaces between official doctrine and the full range of human experience. These people were not always working strictly within the limits that institutional decisions had established. Sometimes they were working with an older inheritance, one that reached back behind the decisions of councils and synods to the original materials, the texts and traditions and images that had been present in the Christian imagination before the official lists were finalized. And in those materials, Uriel was still there. In some Anglican churches and in certain Victorian-era stained glass cycles, Uriel occasionally appears among a fuller company of archangels, rendered in the particular jeweled light that stained glass produces. His attributes visible, his identity clear to anyone who knows the name. The decisions of Rome were not always the decisions of every craftsman who was given a window to fill. And the result is that Uriel survived, quietly and without fanfare, in the glass of certain churches, present in the visual landscape of Christian worship for anyone who looked up from the pew and took the time to read what the light was showing them. The icon tradition of Orthodox Christianity preserves Uriel with more formal theological intention. Icon painting in the Orthodox tradition is not a matter of individual artistic expression. It is a theological act, governed by centuries of accumulated understanding about how sacred beings should be depicted, what attributes they should carry, what their posture and expression and surrounding imagery should communicate about their nature and function. An icon is a theological statement in paint. It says something specific and considered about what the tradition believes about the being depicted. In many Russian and Byzantine icon traditions, depictions of the 7 archangels appear with regularity across centuries of production. These icons typically show a company of 7 winged figures, each carrying the attributes associated with their specific function in the cosmic order. Michael carries a sword or a staff. Gabriel carries a lily or a scroll. Raphael carries a vessel of healing or leads a young figure by the hand. And Uriel, in these icons, typically carries a flame or a sword of fire, consistent with the meaning of his name and the role assigned to him in the traditions the Eastern churches drew on. The flame he carries is not decorative. It is specific. It is the fire of divine light, the same fire that his name encodes. The flame held in the hand of the archangel is a visual statement of the same theological content that his name carries in words. Here is the one whose domain is the light of God at the boundary of things. The icon is saying, in the language of paint and gold and precise symbolic imagery, The same thing that First Enoch was saying in the language of narrative and vision and ancient cosmological poetry. Uriel is still there. He never left the picture. He only left one tradition's official list. And then there is the literary tradition, which maintained his presence in a different register entirely. We have already spent time with John Milton's Uriel in Book 3 of Paradise Lost. But Milton was not the only significant literary figure in the Western tradition who found the name worth keeping. In 1847, Ralph Waldo Emerson published a poem simply called Uriel, included in his collection Poems. It is one of the stranger and more striking pieces in Emerson's body of work. His Uriel is not the guardian of cosmic prisons, or the teacher of astronomy, or the warner of floods. He is something that reflects the particular concerns of mid-19th century American intellectual and spiritual life in a way that is quite different from the ancient texts. Emerson's Uriel is the voice of a truth that the established celestial order finds uncomfortable. He is the one who speaks a clarity that the heavenly court would prefer not to hear. He makes the kind of statement that unsettles those who have organized their understanding of the cosmos around certain fixed assumptions. And in the poem, Uriel retreats, not because he has done anything wrong, not because he has been defeated, but because his truth, once spoken, lingers in the air, whether or not the court wants to acknowledge it. Emerson ends the poem with the image of that truth still working quietly in the fabric of things long after Uriel has stepped back. The connection to everything else we know about Uriel is not difficult to see. Emerson's Uriel carries the same essential attribute that he carries in many of the traditions that preserved his presence. He illuminates. He shows what is there. His light falls on what is actually present, regardless of whether what is actually present is what the established order would prefer to see. And in Emerson's hands, that quality becomes something specifically relevant to the American intellectual moment of the mid-19th century, when certain traditional certainties were beginning to encounter the pressure of honest inquiry. Uriel becomes the figure for a truth that outlasts the discomfort it causes, that keeps working in the fabric of things long after the discomfort has been smoothed over. Certain Anglican churches, where Victorian-era craftsmen depicted a fuller company of archangels, the Russian and Byzantine icon cycles where his image has been preserved across centuries, Milton's angel of light on the surface of the sun in the 17th century, Emerson's uncomfortable voice of clarity in the heavenly court in 1847, 4 different moments in the history of Western art and literature, 4 different ways of keeping a name alive that the official tradition had set down more than 1,000 years before. None of these artists were making a theological argument about Roman canon law. None of them were engaged in a deliberate act of preservation in the face of suppression. They were doing what craftsmen and artists and poets do, which is to reach into the full inheritance of the tradition for the figure that the moment requires, and the figure that the moment required. In Victorian-era church windows and Orthodox icon studios, and a 17th century English epic and a mid-19th century American poem, was the one whose name meant light at the boundary, the one who illuminates what is there, the one who is still in the glass, if you know where to look, the one whose flame is still visible in the icons, carrying the same fire that his name has always carried, through all the centuries of official forgetting and unofficial remembering, through all the councils and canons and decisions and lists, right up to this night, this room, this particular darkness in which you are lying at the threshold of sleep. He is still there, in the glass, in the gold, in the old pages, in the traditions that never forgot. And tonight, for the first time, or perhaps not the first time, you know his name. Names are how the things that are true about the world stay available to the people who need them. You have this one now. Carry it gently into sleep. Let everything slow down now. Whatever is still moving in you, whatever current of thought or feeling is still running beneath the surface of this moment, let it find its way to stillness, not by force, not by deciding to stop thinking and then monitoring yourself to make sure you have stopped, just by allowing the breath to deepen a little more with each exhale, by letting the weight of the body settle more fully into whatever is beneath you, by releasing, very gradually, the small muscular efforts the body makes without being asked, the slight tension in the jaw, the almost imperceptible holding in the shoulders, the faint readiness in the hands that persists long after there is anything left to be ready for. You have come a long way tonight, through the council room in Rome, where a list was shortened and a name was quietly set aside, through the ancient Jewish world where that name first found its full expression, where a figure called Uriel was given a face and a function and a place in the structure of the cosmos, through the traditions that never forgot him, in the highlands of Ethiopia and the icon rooms of the Christian East and the pages of a blind man's greatest poem, through the question that Ezra asked and the answer that Uriel gave, which was not an answer at all, but something more honest than an answer, through the gates of the sun and the architecture of time as the ancient world understood it. Now we rest in the words themselves. What follows is drawn from First Enoch in the translation completed by Robert Henry Charles, published in 1917, a translation that has been in the public domain for over a century and that remains one of the most widely referenced English versions of the text. These words are not paraphrases. They are as close as a translator working more than 100 years ago could come to the ancient text, rendered from the Ethiopic manuscripts that preserved First Enoch across the centuries. The text itself has its origins in the ancient Jewish world of the Second Temple period, and it is through the Ethiopian tradition that it has been most fully preserved and carried forward to us. Read them slowly. There is no hurry. The night is long and the words are old, and they have been waiting a very long time to be heard by someone who understands enough of the story to feel why they matter. From the 9th chapter of First Enoch, the passage in which 4 archangels look down upon the earth and see what has happened to it. Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. And they said one to another, the earth, made without inhabitant, cries the voice of their crying up to the gates of heaven. And now to you, the holy ones of heaven, the souls of men make their suit, saying, bring our cause before the Most High. Pause there for a moment. 4 beings, looking down at a world that has gone wrong, hearing the sound of human suffering rising toward them. The image is ancient. The feeling it carries is not. The gap between the world as it is and the world as it should be is a gap that every human being who has ever paid attention to the state of things has felt. The sense that somewhere there must be a court that can hear the case. That someone must be listening to the voices crying at the gates. Uriel is one of the 4 who hears. Let that land quietly. Let the breath be slow. From the 20th chapter, the passage that gives us the list of archangels and their assigned domains. And these are the names of the holy angels who watch. Uriel, one of the holy angels, who is over the world and over Tartarus. Raphael, one of the holy angels, who is over the spirits of men. Raguel, one of the holy angels who takes vengeance on the world of the luminaries. Michael, one of the holy angels, set over the best part of mankind and over chaos. Sarachael, one of the holy angels, who is set over the spirits, who sin in the spirit. Gabriel, one of the holy angels, who is over paradise and the serpents and the cherubim. Remiel, one of the holy angels, whom God set over those who rise. 7 names, 7 domain, a cosmos in which every territory of existence has a guardian, every boundary has a presence, every aspect of the created order has a being of light whose specific attention is turned toward it. This is the full picture, the one that predates the narrowing, the one that the Ethiopian highlands and the Christian East and the pages of this ancient text have been preserving in full across all the centuries since. Uriel is first, over the world, over the deep place beneath the world, the being whose domain spans from the ordered surface of created existence all the way to the depths beyond it, from the familiar to the incomprehensible, from the known to the utterly unknown. Let the list settle. Let each name land with the weight of its own ancient history. 7 guardians, 7 domain, a cosmos that is watched. From the 21st chapter, the passage in which Uriel takes Enoch to the place of the fallen angels. And I proceeded to where things were chaotic, and I saw there something horrible. I saw neither a heaven above nor a firmly founded earth, but a place chaotic and horrible, and there I saw 7 stars of the heaven bound together in it, like great mountains and burning with fire. Then I said, for what sin are they bound? And on what account have they been cast in hither? Then said Uriel, one of the holy angels, who was with me, and was chief over them, Enoch, why dost thou ask? And why art thou eager for the truth? These are of the number of the stars of heaven, which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord, and are bound here till 10,000 years. The time entailed by their sins are consummated. Uriel speaks directly here, not with evasion and not with more than is asked, simply with the truth of the situation, stated plainly. These are what they are. They are here because of what they did. They will be here until the time of their accounting is finished. This is how Uriel speaks throughout this ancient text, not in metaphors, not in comforting ambiguities, in the specific and unadorned language of someone who sees clearly and considers clarity to be the most honest gift available. Rest in that for a moment. The clarity of someone who sees what is there, the honesty of someone who considers seeing clearly to be the gift itself. From the 72nd chapter, the opening of the astronomical book, where Uriel begins his instruction of Enoch in the structure of the heavens as First Enoch understood them. The book of the courses of the luminaries of the heaven, the relations of each, according to their classes, their dominion and their seasons, according to their names and places of origin, and according to their months, which Uriel, the holy angel, who was with me, who is their guide, showed me, and he showed me all their laws exactly as they are, and how it is with regard to all the years of the world, and unto eternity, till the new creation is accomplished, which dureth till eternity. All their laws exactly as they are. That phrase, the precision of it, the completeness of it, not an approximation, not a partial account calibrated to what the listener is thought capable of holding. All the laws, exactly as they are. The entire architecture of how time works within this ancient vision, given without reduction, shown to a human consciousness by the being whose domain it is. Let the breath be very slow now. Let the body be very still. From the 74th chapter, Uriel, describing the relationship between the solar and lunar calendars as that ancient reckoning understood it. In respect of its days, the sun is in accord precisely as the moon for 364 days, and the deficiency of the moon and of the year amounts to the sun being in accord for 30 days as well as 4 days, which are the intercalary days. The precision here is striking in the context of ancient religious literature. This is the language of careful reckoning, the kind that belongs to a tradition that took the structure of sacred time very seriously. Within the cosmological vision of First Enoch, the count of days in the solar year, the intercalary days required for the correction of the calendar, the mathematical relationship between the sun and moon in their annual cycle, all of this was not administrative detail. It was the shape of sacred time itself. Let that land gently, without needing to analyze it. The ancient world cared deeply about the structure of time because time was sacred to them. The calendar was not a convenience. It was the architecture of the sacred year as they understood it. Let the breath find its own pace again. Let the body release a little more. From the 21st chapter again, the final words Uriel speaks to Enoch at the edge of the world. And from thence I went to another place, which was still more horrible than the former. And I saw a horrible thing, a great fire there which burnt and blazed, and the place was cleft as far as the abyss, being full of great descending columns of fire. And Uriel said to me, There has not been made here any firmament of heaven, and the Spirit of God is here, and beyond this place. There is no heaven, no firmament, no heaven, the edge of the created order, the place beyond which the structure of the cosmos as Enoch knows it does not extend, the absolute boundary of the known world. And Uriel is there, at the most extreme threshold in the entire cosmology of First Enoch, at the place beyond which there is no heaven, at the absolute edge of everything. The Spirit is still present, and Uriel is the one who says so. This is perhaps the deepest thing the ancient text has to say about what Uriel is. He is the one who goes to the edge and finds, even there, the presence of the divine. He is the one whose light is adequate to the most extreme threshold, the one who can stand at the boundary of all created order and say, even here, there is something, even here, the Spirit is present, even here, even in this darkness, even in this ordinary and extraordinary threshold between waking and sleep, even in the soft and spacious place where you are right now, at the edge of the day, at the boundary of the known, dissolving slowly into whatever the night holds. The Spirit is here, in the language of the ancient text that preserved this moment. The one who has always stood at the edge of everything and found the Spirit present is here with it. At the edge of everything, as he has always been. Rest now. The reading is done. The words have landed where they were meant to land. Let the silence hold everything that has been said. Something has shifted by now. If you have been with this story from the beginning, if you have traveled through the council and the texts and the traditions and the art and the vision of Esdras and the gates of the sun and the words of the ancient reading, something in the way you hold the number 3 has probably changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that requires any theological repositioning, just a quiet shift in the felt sense of things. You know the numbers now. The 3 of Rome, the 4 of the directions, the 7 of the full cycle. You have spent time with each of them tonight. You have seen what each one was pointing at and what each one left out. It is worth staying with what those numbers carry before sleep comes. Not in the way of analysis, but in the way of the body absorbing something it has been given. In many symbolic systems, and especially in Christian theology, 3 came to carry a powerful association with divine completeness. The Trinity, 3 days in the tomb. The number 3 had a resonance within Christian theology that made it feel like a natural number for the beings who stood closest to the divine presence. That choice had its own integrity, its own coherence. 4 was the number of the created world. The 4 directions, the 4 seasons, the 4 winds. 4 is the number of complete spatial coverage, the number that leaves no corner of the created order unguarded, a guardian at every horizon, a presence in every direction. Let that image rest in you for a moment. Every direction covered, no corner without a presence. 7 was the number of completeness in time, 7 days of the week. 7 is the number of the full cycle, the number that includes everything from beginning to end and back to beginning again. When the tradition of First Enoch imagined 7 archangels, it was imagining a system that covered not just space, but the full arc of created existence across time. Both the choice of 3 and the traditions that held 4 or 7 had their own integrity. Both had their own logic. Both pointed at something real about the relationship between the divine and the world. But in choosing 3, The Western tradition gave up the specific presence at one particular corner of the created world. The corner that Uriel had always occupied. The West, the direction of the setting sun, the direction of what is passing away, the direction that is behind you when you face the dawn. In the system of four, Uriel stood at that corner. His light fell on the endings, on the threshold moments where one phase of existence gives way to the next. He was the guardian of the direction that no one faces voluntarily, the direction you have to turn around deliberately to see. When the list went to 3, that corner became a corner, the official tradition no longer officially named. A map missing one direction is not wrong. You can navigate with it. But there will always be a region your map does not fully account for, a direction your instruments cannot precisely locate. You have the name now. You have the map with all 4 directions present. You have traveled through the texts and traditions that preserved it. You have heard Uriel speak at the gates of the sun, and at the edge of the world, and at the boundary of what can be understood. A map missing one direction is not wrong. It just takes you somewhere else. Now you have the direction. Now you have all 4. The night is very quiet now. Whatever urgency arrived with the evening has long since dissolved. The sharp-edged world of things that needed doing and things left undone, and conversations that replayed themselves, and decisions that sat unresolved at the center of your attention. All of that belongs to a different kind of consciousness than the one you are in now. It is still there in the sense that tomorrow it will return. But right now, it is very far away, on the other side of a threshold that you have been crossing slowly, all through this long and quiet journey. And that you are very nearly through. You know a name tonight that you may not have known this morning. Not everyone who hears a name at the edge of sleep carries it with them into the morning. The threshold between sleeping and waking is a permeable one. And things that were present in the last moments of consciousness sometimes do not make the crossing back. That is all right. The name will be where it has always been. In the old texts and the icon rooms, and the stained glass of certain churches, and the traditions of the highlands that never forgot, waiting for the next time someone comes looking. But something may remain. Not the full architecture of the story, not the details of councils and manuscripts and the precise count of days in the astronomical book, as the ancient tradition understood it. Something quieter than all of that. A felt sense, a quality of knowing, the particular texture of having spent time with something ancient and true and larger than the ordinary dimensions of the day. The ancient world placed a guardian at the west, at the direction of endings, at the threshold between the light that is retreating and the darkness that is arriving, not because the darkness was dangerous and needed to be defended against, but because every threshold is real, every crossing matters. Every moment when one order of existence gives way to another is a moment that deserves a presence, a witness, an illumination that falls on the boundary itself and makes visible what is there. You are at that threshold now, not the grand cosmological threshold of the edge of the created order, not the flood threshold where the world was about to end and a warning needed to be delivered, not the threshold of the unanswerable question where Esdras stood exhausted and bereft and needing to know that his inability to answer was not a failure. The ordinary threshold, the one that arrives every night, the one that every human being who has ever lived has crossed and will cross again. The edge of the day, the boundary of the known, the place where the consciousness that navigates the world falls quiet and something else takes over for a while. In the language of the traditions that remembered him, the Archangel of Light stands at this boundary, not as a threat, not as a demand, simply as a presence, simply the light that belongs specifically to this place. This quality of crossing, this particular darkness that is not empty, but full of whatever it is that sleep opens into. The traditions that kept his name alive spoke it before sleep. In the highlands of Ethiopia, where his name is canonical scripture. In the icon rooms of the Christian East, where his image holds a painted flame, in the Kabbalistic-influenced devotional practices of communities that placed him at the West, at the back, at the direction you cannot see when you face the dawn, in the old manuscripts that have been copied and recopied across centuries by hands that understood they were preserving something worth preserving. Before sleep, they spoke the name, not as a spell, not as a formula that compels anything, simply as an acknowledgement, an act of recognition directed at the quality of presence that the threshold hour has always carried. Whether or not any particular tradition was naming it, the threshold is here. In the language of many of the traditions that remembered him, you are in his territory now, and that territory was imagined as the place where the light at the boundary is present, not to demand anything but simply to illuminate the crossing for the one who is making it. The same light that fell through the gates of the sun, as the ancient text described them. The same light that was present at the edge of the world, where Uriel spoke to Enoch in the place beyond heaven. The same light that showed Ezra the true shape of his unanswerable question. The same light that found its way into Victorian-era church windows and painted icons and the pages of the blind poet's greatest poem and all the other places where the name survived the forgetting. That light is here, in this darkness, at this threshold, somewhere, in a tradition that never forgot. There is still a name spoken before sleep, a name that means light at the edge, a name that stands where one world ends and another begins. You are there now. In the language of the traditions that kept this name alive, the crossing is watched over, the threshold is illuminated. The presence that belongs to this specific quality of darkness is here. Rest.